Dr. Ethan Lin was a psychologist known more for his unusual theories than for any groundbreaking research. A self-proclaimed master of understanding the human psyche, he often donned the title like a badge of honor. On this particular Tuesday afternoon, he stood before a room filled with students, armed with an array of outlandish anecdotes about human fears, his wild gesticulations punctuating the air like confetti at a parade. "Fear of public speaking," he exclaimed, pacing back and forth with theatrical flair. "You know that feeling when you're about to get up in front of a crowd and suddenly wish you'd opted for a career as a professional dog walker instead? Or maybe that fear of spiders, when you see one, you suddenly become the star of an interpretive dance of horror." Laughter erupted from the audience, and for a moment, Ethan basked in the warm glow of his own charisma, but the highlight of his lecture was the mirror, an antique he had picked up at a garage sale the previous weekend, convinced it held secrets waiting to be unveiled. Its ornate frame was carved with strange symbols that seemed to wiggle under the fluorescent lights, and Ethan had jokingly dubbed it the reflector of regrets. "Behold," he proclaimed, gesturing dramatically towards the mirror. "This is no ordinary mirror. It's a portal to your subconscious fears. Who's brave enough to try?" A brave soul from the back row, a timid girl with glasses, raised her hand. "Will it show my fear of failing statistics?" she asked, a quiver in her voice. Ethan chuckled, "Only if you promise to laugh about it afterward. Come on up." As she approached, the room's energy shifted. The light flickered momentarily, but Ethan waved it off as a simple technical glitch. She peered into the glass, her face morphing from curiosity to dread. "Oh my God," she gasped, stumbling back. "What do you see?" Ethan pressed, feigning concern while secretly relishing the drama. My teacher. She's coming after me with a giant red pen." Laughter roared again, but Ethan felt a shiver run down his spine. There was something unsettling about that mirror, something he couldn't quite put his finger on. Still, he brushed it off, telling himself it was just a prop to make his lectures more engaging. The lecture concluded with a standing ovation, and Ethan left the auditorium feeling like a rock star. But the mirror clung to his thoughts, its mysterious charm whispering promises of deeper truths. What if it really could reveal something profound? The thought ignited a spark of obsession that evening, as he sat in his office, an eclectic mix of books, scattered papers, and the imposing mirror. He found himself drawn to it once again. After all, what could be more interesting than peeling back the layers of the mind? He leaned closer, peering into the glass. "All right, let's see what you've got," he muttered to himself. The reflection showed him, but it also revealed a darker, more confident version of himself standing just behind. For a moment, Ethan wondered if the flickering lights were playing tricks on him, or if the mirror was indeed alive in some surreal way. As the days turned into weeks, the mirror became Ethan's closest confidant. He conducted sessions with himself, whispering his deepest fears into its reflective surface. Each time, he'd see not just his own image but fleeting shadows of things that terrified him: the fear of inadequacy, the dread of loneliness, the gnawing anxiety that he'd never be truly loved. "Okay, so I'm afraid of dying alone," he admitted one night, his voice barely above a whisper. The reflection smirked back at him, eyes glimmering with something other than sympathy, something that felt more like mockery. His obsession deepened. He began to notice the effect the mirror had on his mood. In his more vulnerable moments, it seemed to taunt him. As he conducted ridiculous self-experiments, dressing up in silly costumes and mimicking therapy sessions with himself, he would laugh hysterically, the sound echoing in the empty office. "Look at me. I'm a professional therapist," to my own reflection. But the laughter felt hollow. One particularly strange afternoon, he decided to invite his colleague and friend, Dr. Mia Chen, to join him in an experiment. Mia was the epitome of grounded practicality, and Ethan loved her for it. She had a way of reining in his wild ideas, providing a counterbalance to his flights of fancy. "Okay, Mia, this is going to blow your mind," he declared as she stepped into his office, her eyebrows arching skeptically at the sight of the ancient mirror. "I've discovered that this bad boy shows your deepest fears." Mia crossed her arms, her lips curving into a bemused smile. "Ethan, it's a mirror. It shows your reflection, not your psyche." "Just humor me," he insisted. "Come on, let's do it together." With a resigned sigh, she stepped forward. They both gazed into the glass, and Ethan felt a jolt of excitement. "What do you see?" he asked eagerly. "Ugh, nothing, just me," she said, rolling her eyes. But then her expression shifted. "Wait. I see myself, but I'm older and, oh no. I'm wearing a catsuit and juggling." "What does that mean?" Ethan burst into laughter. "Maybe you're afraid of becoming a cat lady?" "Shut up," she replied, playfully shoving him. But then her face turned serious. "What about you? What do you see?" He hesitated, feeling the weight of the question. "Honestly, I see a confident version of myself. One who doesn't care about what anyone thinks." Mia raised an eyebrow. "And that scares you?" "Not as much as it should," he replied, half joking. But as they stood there, the atmosphere shifted. The reflection warped slightly, the confident version of him becoming increasingly sinister, its grin widening, revealing teeth that glinted like glass. Suddenly, a flicker of panic surged through Ethan. "Mia, maybe we should stop," but before he could finish, the lights flickered again, and the mirror seemed to pulse with energy. Mia stepped back, her eyes widening in disbelief. "Ethan, what is happening?" "I don't know. I just wanted to see what would happen," he exclaimed, feeling the growing unease gnaw at him. In that moment, the reflection smirked back at them, a malevolent glint in its eyes. The room felt charged with an energy that was both thrilling and terrifying. It was as if the mirror itself was alive, a sentient being feeding off their fears and anxieties. After that day, Ethan's life began to spiral. He grew increasingly distant from Mia and his patients, the mirror becoming the sole focus of his existence. In the mornings, he'd stand before it, performing ridiculous self-affirmations that quickly morphed into darker rituals. "I am confident. I am charismatic. I will conquer my fears." Each proclamation seemed to embolden the reflection, which took on a life of its own. His friends grew concerned, but he brushed off their worries with a wave of his hand. "I'm just exploring the depths of the human psyche," he would joke, though a hint of desperation colored his laughter. Then came the day when everything changed. As he stood before the mirror one evening, a thought struck him. What if he could confront his greatest fear? He peered into the glass, his heart racing. "What's the worst that could happen?" he muttered. "I might just find out who I really am." In that instant, the reflection shifted again, the confident version of himself taking a step forward, the glass rippling as if it were water. "Join me," it whispered, the voice echoing in his mind, seductive and dark. Ethan felt a chill creep down his spine, but the allure was undeniable. It was an invitation to embrace his truest self, to shed the insecurities that had plagued him for years. "What's the catch?" he asked, his voice trembling. "Only your soul," the reflection replied, its grin now broader than ever, the edges of its mouth stretching beyond human limits. "You've wanted this, haven't you? To be free of fear, of judgment?" As Ethan stared into the glass, he felt himself teetering on the edge of an abyss. The allure of freedom tugged at him, but something deep within him screamed to resist. He turned away from the mirror, heart racing, the reflection's laughter ringing in his ears. But the whispers of the mirror lingered, seductive and enticing. That night, sleep evaded him. He tossed and turned, plagued by dreams of the reflection, its piercing eyes, its unsettling confidence, a mockery of everything he was. By morning, he was a shell of himself, haunted and unkempt, the weight of his choices pressing down like an anvil. Despite his turmoil, he found himself unable to resist the mirror's call. He returned to it, drawn like a moth to a flame, hoping to confront whatever had taken root in his mind. "I need to know," he whispered, bracing himself. As he gazed into the glass, the reflection was waiting, its grin a twisted mirror of his own fear. "You're afraid," it taunted, the voice laced with amusement. "Afraid of losing yourself, yet you're already halfway there." "No," Ethan said, desperation creeping into his voice. "I won't let you take me." "Oh, but you're already mine," the reflection purred, the glass rippling again as it seemed to expand and contract, pulling him closer. "You've been feeding me your fears, Ethan. And now, it's time for you to step into the light." Panic surged through him, and he staggered back, the room spinning. He had to escape, had to sever this connection before it consumed him. But with every attempt to turn away, the reflection reached out, pulling him into a deeper abyss. The days blurred together, each spent in an ever-tightening spiral of madness. He laughed and cried, the absurdity of his situation reaching new heights. "I'm going crazy," he exclaimed one day, flailing dramatically in front of the mirror. "Look at me. I'm losing my mind." The reflection simply smirked, watching his descent into chaos with a malevolent glee. His friends finally staged an intervention, dragging him away from the mirror and demanding he seek help. But even as he sat in the therapist's office, he could still feel the pull of the glass, whispering promises of power and freedom. It taunted him, reminding him of what he could become if he only gave in. "Ethan, are you with us?" the therapist asked, her voice breaking through his daze. "Of course," he replied with forced cheerfulness, but the laughter that followed felt strained, as if he were playing a part in a comedy that had turned tragic. As time went on, Ethan found himself losing more than just friends. He lost pieces of his identity. The once quirky psychologist who thrived on humor and connection faded into a husk, a mere spectator watching his life unravel. The mirror, however, thrived. It grew more vibrant, its surface reflecting a distortion of reality that was both enthralling and horrifying. And then, in a moment of clarity amidst the chaos, Ethan realized he was standing at a crossroads. He could continue to succumb to the mirror's influence, embracing a power that felt exhilarating but dangerously unstable, or he could fight back, reclaiming his true self. With a newfound determination, he returned to the mirror one final time. "You won't win," he declared, staring into the glass. "I am not you." The reflection seemed to waver, a flicker of uncertainty crossing its face. "But you're afraid, Ethan. Afraid of who you really are." "Maybe so," he admitted, "but I won't let you define me any longer." With that, he took a deep breath and shattered the glass with a furious swing of his arm. The sound echoed like thunder, and for a moment, time stood still. As the shards fell, they scattered around him, glimmering like stars against the dim light of the room, and in that instant, something profound shifted within him. Instead of losing himself, he felt liberated. The shards reflected not just fragments of his fears but also the kaleidoscope of his existence, the laughter, the sorrow, the chaos, the beauty. As he knelt among the fragments, a sense of peace washed over him. He was still flawed, still human, but now he embraced the entirety of his being. The mirror's power had been formidable, but it had also awakened something deep within him, a realization that true strength came from accepting his vulnerabilities. In the weeks that followed, Ethan slowly rebuilt his life. He reconnected with Mia, who welcomed him back with open arms, her concern replaced with a fierce loyalty that reminded him of the importance of friendship. He returned to his patients, armed with stories of his journey, interspersing humor with genuine vulnerability, creating a space where they, too, could embrace their fears. One day, as he prepared for another lecture, he glanced at the empty space where the mirror once stood. A smile crept across his face. "Well, I won't be needing that again," he mused aloud. His journey had transformed him. He now understood that fears would always exist, lurking in the shadows, but they no longer defined him. Instead, they became a part of his narrative, a reminder that life's absurdities could be faced with humor, grace, and authenticity. As he stepped onto the stage, the audience looked back at him with eager faces. "So, let's talk about fears, shall we?" he began, his voice steady and inviting. "I promise, this time, I won't be using any mirrors." Laughter erupted in the auditorium, and for the first time in a long while, Ethan felt truly at home. The reflection that mattered most was no longer in a glass, it was within him, embracing every nuance of his imperfect, beautiful life. As Ethan stood before the audience, a rush of familiarity flooded over him. The room pulsed with energy, and he could feel the weight of their expectations pressing against him like a warm embrace. He leaned into that energy, determined to connect with each individual in front of him. "Let's talk about fears," he began, his voice steady and engaging. "I promise, this time, I won't be using any mirrors." Laughter rippled through the crowd, and Ethan smiled, realizing how far he had come. He felt free, like a man who had broken the shackles of his own mind. Over the next hour, he navigated through tales of irrational fears, the absurdity of phobias, and the power of laughter as a coping mechanism. He shared snippets of his experience with the mirror, weaving humor into the dark threads of his story. "I learned that fear is a funny thing," he said, pacing the stage. "It can feel like a monster under your bed, but often it's just your imagination throwing a temper tantrum." As he spoke, he noticed familiar faces among the audience, Mia's beaming smile, a few former patients nodding in recognition, and even a few students who had attended that first lecture. Their expressions mirrored his own transformation, and for a moment, he felt a swell of gratitude for the journey that had brought him here. After the lecture, the crowd dispersed, but a small group lingered, eager to talk. Mia was among them, her eyes sparkling with pride. "You really nailed it today, Ethan," she said, her enthusiasm infectious. "I could tell you found your rhythm again." "Thanks, Mia," he replied, chuckling. "I just had to get rid of that pesky mirror. It really knew how to steal the show." As they walked out together, Ethan felt lighter than he had in years. The chaos of the past months had faded into the background, replaced by a renewed sense of purpose. He'd traded in the mirror for something much more valuable, authentic connections with the people around him. "Do you think the mirror had any power?" Mia asked, tilting her head as they stepped into the bustling street filled with the hum of city life. "I mean, really?" Ethan pondered for a moment, then shrugged. "It was definitely a catalyst. It forced me to confront parts of myself I had been ignoring. But I think the real magic lies in how we choose to deal with our fears, don't you?" "Absolutely. It's all about perspective," she said, linking her arm with his as they strolled down the sidewalk. "And a little bit of humor never hurts." As they wandered through the city, the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting golden hues across the buildings. They laughed and shared stories, and Ethan felt the camaraderie wrap around him like a warm blanket. It was a simple pleasure, but one he had missed during his descent into obsession. The days turned into weeks, and Ethan embraced his new outlook on life. He began to incorporate more humor into his practice, guiding his patients to confront their fears through laughter and self-acceptance. He encouraged them to share their most absurd fears: fear of clowns, fear of mayonnaise, even fear of wearing socks with sandals. The sessions became a safe space where vulnerability and laughter coexisted, and Ethan watched as his patients blossomed under the gentle guidance of humor. One evening, as he prepared for a group session, Ethan reflected on the changes he had undergone. He was no longer merely a psychologist, he had become a storyteller, a facilitator of healing through shared experiences. The power of connection had become his greatest tool, and he was grateful for the lessons the mirror had imparted, lessons he would carry with him for the rest of his life. One patient, a young woman named Sarah, had particularly resonated with him. She struggled with intense social anxiety, often finding herself paralyzed by the thought of speaking in front of others. Ethan decided to use their sessions to create a mock talk show where they could explore her fears in a light-hearted manner. "Okay, Sarah, welcome to The Fear Factor," he announced dramatically one day, adopting a cheesy game show host voice. "What's our first fear today?" She giggled, the sound brightening the room. "Talking to strangers, I guess." "Ah, a classic. Let's see what our audience thinks. Survey says." Ethan paused for effect, looking at an imaginary audience. "Terrifying. But fear not. We have a few tips and tricks to turn that fear into laughter." They spent the next hour role-playing different scenarios, from ordering coffee to striking up conversations at parties. Each time Sarah faltered, Ethan interjected with silly antics, from exaggerated gestures to ridiculous accents, and soon, the room was filled with laughter, Sarah's laughter. By the end of the session, she had transformed from a timid girl into a vibrant young woman brimming with newfound confidence. "I can't believe I actually enjoyed that," she admitted, wiping tears of laughter from her eyes. "See? You have the power to turn your fears into something fun," Ethan replied, feeling a surge of pride. "The more we face them with a smile, the less power they have over us." Weeks passed, and Ethan's practice flourished. He hosted workshops blending therapy with comedy, inviting local comedians to share their own experiences with fear and failure. The events became a hit, attracting people from all walks of life. Laughter became a shared language, uniting individuals who once felt isolated by their anxieties. One day, while preparing for another workshop, Ethan received an unexpected email. It was an invitation to speak at a national psychology conference about his innovative approach to treating anxiety through humor. He could hardly contain his excitement. This was his chance to share his journey and inspire others to embrace their fears. As he prepared his speech, he reflected on the mirror and the path it had taken him down. It had been a dark time, but now, he stood on the precipice of something incredible. The mirror's whispers no longer haunted him. They had transformed into a clarion call for authenticity and connection. The day of the conference arrived, and Ethan stepped onto the stage with a mix of nerves and exhilaration. He took a deep breath, scanning the sea of faces eager to hear his story. "Good morning, everyone. I'm here to talk about fear and how to turn it into something positive." He began sharing his experiences, weaving in the humor that had become his hallmark. The audience responded with laughter and nods of understanding, and he felt a powerful connection growing between him and the crowd. As he reached the climax of his talk, he shared the story of the mirror, the absurdity of his obsession, and the transformative power of humor. "Fear can feel like a shadow looming over you, but it doesn't have to define you," he concluded, his voice steady. "Embrace it, laugh at it, and watch how it loses its power." Applause erupted, and Ethan beamed, feeling a rush of validation. He had found his voice, his purpose, and his joy in helping others navigate their fears. After the talk, several attendees approached him, eager to learn more about his methods. Their enthusiasm fueled his passion, and he felt a renewed sense of direction in his career. Months turned into a year, and as he continued to grow professionally, Ethan also made time for his personal life. He and Mia grew closer, their friendship blossoming into something deeper. They began sharing dinners, late-night conversations, and adventures in the city. It felt as though the universe had conspired to bring them together, and Ethan cherished every moment. One evening, as they walked through a park, the autumn leaves crunching beneath their feet, Mia turned to him with a serious expression. "Ethan, can I ask you something?" "Of course," he replied, sensing the weight behind her words. "Do you ever think about the mirror?" He paused, searching for the right words. Sometimes, but not in the way you might think. It was a catalyst, a turning point. I learned a lot about myself, about fear, and about connection. I wouldn't trade that experience for anything. Mia nodded, her gaze thoughtful. I'm glad to hear that. I worry sometimes that it left a mark. You seemed so consumed by it. It did leave a mark, he admitted, a soft smile crossing his face. But it's a reminder of my journey. I've learned that fear can be a powerful teacher, and laughter is the antidote. Mia smiled, a glimmer of admiration in her eyes. You've come so far, Ethan. I'm really proud of you. Feeling emboldened, he took her hand in his, the warmth spreading through him. I couldn't have done it without you, Mia. You grounded me when I needed it the most. They stood in silence for a moment, the air thick with unspoken feelings. Finally, Ethan leaned in, planting a gentle kiss on her lips. It was a moment of clarity, a culmination of the connection they had built together. As they pulled away, he could see the surprise and joy dancing in her eyes. Wow, she said, breathless. I didn't see that coming. Neither did I, he confessed, laughing nervously. But it feels right, doesn't it? Absolutely, she replied, her smile radiant. From that day forward, their relationship blossomed, each day a new chapter in their shared story. They found comfort in one another, navigating the ups and downs of life with laughter and love. Ethan continued to speak at conferences and workshops, always returning to his core message: fear is a part of life, but it doesn't have to hold us back. He often included Mia in his talks, showcasing their playful banter as they tackled the topic together, blending humor and vulnerability into a powerful narrative. Years later, as they sat together on a cozy couch, Ethan flipped through old photographs. Among them was a picture of the infamous mirror, its glass cracked and shimmering like a broken promise. He chuckled at the memory, grateful for the lesson it had imparted. Do you ever miss it? Mia asked, eyeing the photo with curiosity. Not really, Ethan replied, shaking his head. It was a necessary chapter, but I'm glad it's closed. I've found so much more in this life: friendship, love, laughter. And you're still helping people, she said, resting her head on his shoulder. You've turned your journey into something beautiful. He smiled, warmth swelling in his chest. Yeah, and I'll keep doing it. Life is too short to be afraid of our fears. As they cuddled together, the city bustling outside their window, Ethan felt an overwhelming sense of contentment. The journey had shaped him, but it had also led him to a place of acceptance and joy. He realized that while fears might always linger in the shadows, they would never again define him. Hey, he said, nudging her playfully, do you think we should get a new mirror? Just to see how we've changed? Mia laughed, lifting her head to look at him. Only if it's a funhouse mirror. They both burst into laughter, the sound echoing through their home, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. The mirror had been just a mirror, but the true reflection of life was the laughter and love they shared. As they settled back into the warmth of one another, Ethan felt at peace. He had faced his fears, laughed in their face, and emerged stronger than ever. The future loomed bright and full of promise, and he was ready to embrace it all, one laugh at a time.